Welcome to Carl Walter for his presentation on the Farmington Canal. Thank you for coming.
All right. Now, at this point, things are kind of jumbled up, but I'm supposed to talk about the Farmington Canal in the Farmington Valley. This is 4 towns. Generally, we do 1 town in a talk, and 4 towns is going to be impossible, despite the fact we're starting late. So what I plan to do was just to skip over and touch some of the major engineering achievements, engineering features on the canal, which are of interest and probably a lot of you don't know too much about. And that's what I was going to do, and I guess I probably still will. The question is, with this late hour, do you want me to skip the preamble, which takes about 5 or 6 minutes, out of my head, basically why the canal was built and so on and so forth. If you want me to skip that, I'll go directly to what I was going to do. If you want to sit through what I was going to say, we can do that too. Do the whole thing. All right. Okay. And the lady coming back is on her way back, right?
Yes.
Well, okay. 200 years ago, overland transportation was very difficult. Roads, where they existed at all, were narrow, ungraded, unpaved, and surfaced with rocks and ruts. Depending on the season, they were muddy, dusty, or snow-covered. There were very few bridges across rivers and streams. Because transportation was difficult and time-consuming, most people rarely traveled more than a few miles from home, ever. They ate and they wore what they produced on their farms, and they used products that were manufactured locally. Unless one lived within a few miles of either the Connecticut River or Long Island Sound, any surplus production one might wish to send to market was usually priced out of the market by the cost of transportation. Certain products could be altered enough to make them worth transporting. For instance, milk could be turned into cheese, and apples could be made into brandy. But this was not the case with bulk commodities such as timber or firewood, shingles, copper ore, bricks. Similarly, imported goods such as sugar and salt were more expensive because of the cost of transportation. Now, in 1820, Connecticut had 2 capitals, Hartford and New Haven. Each of these was in competition with the other for primacy, in population, in wealth, and ultimately in power. Hartford was located at the head of sloop navigation on the Connecticut River, which gave ocean-going ships access to much of the trade from northern New England. New Haven, on Long Island Sound, had a merchant fleet that traded worldwide, but had no access to the interior. When a New Haven merchant looked north, he saw that it cost as much to send a barrel of fish to Farmington as it did to send that same barrel to London in England. In the early 1820s, New Haven's leaders decided to address this problem by financing and building a canal between their town and Northampton, Massachusetts. This man-made river, which is analogous to today's I-91, would give New Haven access to interior markets. Indeed, canal transportation had several advantages over river transportation in that there was never a current to pull against. There were no waterfalls, no rapids, no rocks, shoals, and the channel did not shift after every storm. Indeed, canal boats would float on calm water and be pulled with ease across a mirror-smooth surface with the almost unbelievable speeds of up to 4 miles an hour. Now, this generally brings a laugh. 4 miles an hour doesn't seem like much today, but then one horse could pull 1 ton in a wagon over land in 1 hour. The same horse with a canal can pull 20 tons at 2 or 3 miles an hour. I doubt 4 because that was reserved for packet boats and they didn't weigh very much. But canal boats are such that 1 or 2 guys can pull a 20-ton a boat loaded with 20 tons of goods. Not forever, but they can move it. So, that being said, we'll move on to where we've got the computer. I'm going to start showing the route of the canal from Long Island Sound in New Haven down here. And the black line here is the canal running up from New Haven to Hampton to Cheshire. And notice over here on the side, these hills and these hills, which are separating anybody in this valley that we live in, and even down below into Cheshire and Hampton, from the Connecticut River. This is one of the problems which we would have getting goods to market. You've all gone over Avon Mountain on 44, and you can imagine that before it was a modern road and before it was graded and when it was lumpy, bumpy, rocky, and whatever, and how fast a horse goes 1 mile an hour. It would take forever and days to get stuff over to the river. So that's a problem. Going farther north to Cheshire, we go through Southington and up into Farmington. And here I have to stop and show you something. That's the town of Farmington in 1774. It was the 10th largest population center in the 13 colonies at the time. It was a huge place. The population of Farmington was 6,000 people in 1774, more than Hartford and behind New Haven, but not that much. Now, by the time we're talking about the canal in the early 1820s, we've got this situation where Farmington has shrunk because all these other towns have left. However, even though it has a population of 3,000 now and Hartford 6,000, if you add all the population to the towns that are left onto what's now Farmington, the population is 10,000, way more than Hartford and even more than New Haven. Now, why do I say all this? Because this is a tremendous market. It's an inland market that New Haven never had access to before. It's right on Hartford's doorstep, and if they can take that and take it to New Haven, they've pulled a big one on Hartford. So, continuing north, we're going up here. Whoops, I went too far north. Where did I go? Simsbury, Granby, Northington. Avon is then called Northington, so that's here. But then Simsbury, Granby, and then the Farmington Canal ends here at the state line, and a new company called the Hampshire and Hampton Canal Company builds the canal all the way through Massachusetts, through Southwick, and up into Southampton and East Hampton, and finally to the Connecticut River in Northampton. And this is New Haven's ultimate goal. Since Hartford's been enjoying this trade with northern New England forever and ever, basically for 200 years, New Haven wants its share. So they figure if they can tap the Connecticut River north of Hartford, they can redirect a good deal of this trade to the port of New Haven. This is their ultimate reason for building the canal. It happened as a happenstance to help out Farmington and to help out all the towns in the Farmington Valley and all these other towns in Massachusetts that are separated from the river by these hills that run all the way up to Mount Tom. But they really wanted to get to the river. So that's where it goes, and that's why it went there. Now, I want to do one other thing while I'm up here, and that's to show you. This is Lyman and Elder's Storehouse in Southampton, Massachusetts. This was built in 1834, just as the canal was being finished up there. It's built as a warehouse and a place for the canal boat to unload goods. This is lock 22 right beside it. Only half of it is still standing when this picture was taken in 1933. But you can see a boat can park in the lock and take goods off, put them in the warehouse, and so on and so forth, back and forth. Well, that's fine. They do that everywhere. Why am I here? I'm here because I want to show you some documents that we have related to this. Now, this document is November 13th, 1839. Bear in mind that the canal, probably by the 2nd or 3rd or 4th of December, will close for the season because of ice. Now, Southampton is a little town about 10 miles by road from Northampton. Northampton gets all its goods up the river from wherever they're coming from, north or south. And then they have to go over a road 10 miles long to get to Southampton. Well, with the ice in the canal, you got snow on the ground, and pretty soon this town is going to be snowbound for the winter. So the guy that runs the storehouse figures we'll go down to New Haven and stock up, and that way we'll have everything we need for the winter. So here he is on the first day, November 13th, and he buys molasses, and he buys sugar and tea, raisins, salt, baking soda, cinnamon, pipes, a box of pipes and tobacco to go with it, cloves, nutmeg, nails, whatever. Bushels of salt and coffee and sugar and oil and 500 pounds of codfish and barrels of flour and so on and so on. Here we have a ream of wrapping paper. They didn't have paper bags back then. They weren't invented yet. So we got more tobacco, and we got more tea, and we got more swordfish, and we got soup, and we got shot. All right, that's one day. The next day, he goes over to another store and he buys all kinds of nuts. Filberts, Grenoble nuts, and I've forgotten what those are, and peanuts. And the next day, he's lucky, he finds some damaged barrels of flour, and he buys those too. So on the 16th, which is the next day after that, it's all packed on a Plainville Canal boat named the Ceres and shipped north to Southampton to stock his store for the winter. 20,000 pounds, over 10 tons of goods on that one trip. $31.14 transportation, but he's set for the winter. And that's why this canal was so important, simply to Simsbury, to Granby, to Westfield, especially to Westfield, all the towns that are landlocked and away from the river by this line of hills that they can't get over. And so I just show that by way of illustration. Is what's happening in Southampton is happening everywhere else, I'm sure. So let's go back to another way of looking at the canal. Where am I? Engineering, I'm abbreviated here. Canal profile, I want feeder canals. Feeder canals, feeder canals. Okay. Now, here is a profile of the canal. It's not done by the canal company. Actually, it's done by the Connecticut River Company, which is a Hartford company running goods up and down the river in competition with the canal. They built the Windsor Locks Canal, and they were associated with the South Hadley Canal and so on. But in 1829 or 1830, the canal company needed money to finish the canal in Massachusetts. They went to Congress and asked for money. This is propaganda or lobbying against the canal's proposal by the Connecticut River Company, showing how long the canal is and how many locks it has and how much extra distance you have to go to get to Northampton. Whereas if you're on the river, you can start at Hartford. You just got this one little canal and this other little canal. They're portage canals around Rapids and Falls, and this one's around the Hadley Falls. And you're right at Northampton. And this is the way we've been doing it for 200 years. Why should we do anything else? Meanwhile, the canal has got 60 locks, and we'll go backwards, but you're coming up from the river to the level in Northampton. It's about 48 feet, and across the Northampton level, and then up to the Timber Swamp Summit through Southampton, and then down through Westfield to the Westfield River Valley, and then up again to the Congamon Ponds, and then down again through Granby to the Long Level, which runs 26 miles from Granby down to Cheshire, to Southington without a lock, and then we step 22 locks down to New Haven Harbor. The reason I'm showing you this is because one of the things about understanding a canal is levels. It's all about water and where it is and where it's going, and it's all in levels. There are no currents because there are no gradients, and you have to step between levels in locks. But once you're there, there's no current to pull against, and there's nothing to be contending with. The reason I'm showing you this is that where we're concentrating our show tonight is between the Farmington River feeder here, which puts water into the Long Level, which flows 36 miles south to New Haven and 16 miles north to Granby, and the Salmon Brook feeder here, which is at the level of the Congamon Ponds, but still in Connecticut, which supplies this 5 miles of canal up here down to the locks, which go up to the level of the Congamon Ponds. So we'll be in this area right here for the whole night, except for the first thing I want to show you is just for completeness. We're down here in New Haven. This is where it's all going. This is the New Haven Harbor Basin. It's a 15-acre stretch of water which has been created by making Basin Wharf as a 1,300-foot extension from Long Wharf over to Brewery Street near Water Street in New Haven, and cutting off a piece of Long Island Sound, 15 acres of it, and saying this is the Canal Basin. This is a long stone pier. It's based in the mud of New Haven Harbor on a timber foundation, and then 2 stone walls, each 7 feet wide at the bottom and 5 feet wide at the top, but 40 feet apart, were laid parallel along this 1,000 feet so that they could be filled with earth and serve as a rampart against the ocean and something to hold the water back in the basin in case the tide was out. There were 2 pass-throughs. They're circled here. Those allowed canal boats to pass from Long Island Sound into the basin and back and forth. They had some other uses, too, for generating power. I don't know how successful those were. This is a 1934 aerial of the same thing. The harbor basin, you can see pretty much the way it was on the original map. You can see the East Channel, which still exists. The site of the West Channel is still there, but it's been covered up because by this time, almost the entire basin has been filled for use as a railway yard. And you can see the rail lines coming up from the bottom on the left and swinging up to go towards Boston and Northampton. But off to the side in the old harbor basin is a freight yard. This is a very good picture. It shows the actual basin with water in it. It's the only one we have. It's from 1865. By this time, you can see over here on the right side freight cars. That's because the western half of the basin has been filled by that time as a railway yard already, but you can see boxcars lining there. And on the outside, you can see masts of ocean-going ships still there, serving the same function with the railroad as they did with a canal for passing goods back and forth from up and down wherever the railroad's bringing them out to the ocean and back the other way. This just happens to be the Yale crew posing here on the water. Good thing they did, otherwise we'd never know what the basin looked like with water in it, but there it is. This is what the bottom looks like. It's just the bottom of New Haven Harbor. It's a muddy mess, not very deep. This is the eastern pass-through from the inside in 1932, and this is the same thing close up. Those are some of the walls that I was talking about. And that's the basin, and that's where everything's going. So that's why New Haven built this. They weren't kidding around. They built it to last, and they did a good job of construction. And mind you, they financed it all themselves. There was no federal government, there was no state government. There was New Haven and its merchants. So we'll start now going through the Farmington Valley at the bottom. Where the Farmington Valley really begins is where the Pequabic River joins the Farmington River, which is right at this point. This is a Pequabic going back up into Plainville. And we're going to start right here. I should go back and say, this is the original engineering map of the canal. You can see the Pequabic over here winding its way. The mouth is just over here off the side of the picture. This is a wonderful picture. It was done by Ruth Scudder in 1947. She was a librarian at the Farmington Library, and for some reason she took this picture. It shows the bend of the Farmington River coming in from the right in the middle and then swinging and then going out below to the right again. But the good thing about this is it shows the mouth of the Pequabic, which is right here, coming in. Now, in the 1780s, the very first idea for a canal was floated after the end of the Revolution, and it involved putting a dam across the Farmington River somewhere right about here so that the water would pile up and flow into the Pequabic, which would be run backwards into the center of Plainville, where a level canal would be built to the headwaters of the Quinnipiac and then follow its way down to New Haven. That was the first idea. Nothing ever came of it because I think the economy was in terrible ruins for a generation or two, and finally by the time it recovered, better ideas were afoot. But that was the first idea. This slide also shows the canal in the foreground. Right here is the canal. This is the towpath, and there's the Farmington River. Now, when the canal was in operation, this part of the canal was filled with water from the Farmington River. And here they are both in the same picture, but the river is about 25 feet lower than the canal. The water's heavy, at about 62.5 pounds per cubic foot. How do you lift water, enough water, from the river to fill a canal in a day before we had pumps and power? Well, what they did was use the sun as a pump. Water vapor would go up and form clouds, which would produce rain, which fell and was collected in rivers where it was held behind dams, which were located at the highest levels of the canal. And the water behind these dams was then fed into the canal as it was needed. And this is where I showed you the feeder canal supplying the long level. This is where it came from a dam about 3 miles up the river from this particular bend, where the river is at the same level as the canal. So if the river's at the same level of the canal and we've got to come up 26 or 25 feet, how does it get here? It gets here from behind the dam, but it has to take a 6-mile route to raise that 25 feet to get in the canal right here in front of our eyes. But it has to run 6 miles to do it, and I'll show you that in a bit. We're going up there presently. But before we do, I wanted to show you something else. This is actually, if we're looking at the last picture, if we turn right and look along the river, we'll see this. And there's the river now running north. The bend is down here off the left. And you can see the canal snaking its way along the riverbed. You can see the towpath on the left there and the prism deer on the right. This is basically behind what's now the cemetery in, what do they call it? I've forgotten the name of the cemetery. Riverside Cemetery in Farmington. So with this, I want to say something else, which was that the advantages that I talked about of canal transportation were not without some offsetting disadvantages. With its feeders, the canal measured over or almost 100 miles in length and was built on 61 different levels. Finding enough water to fill the canal was always a problem, except on those occasions, and they did happen, when there was too much water. Now, each linear foot of canal, each linear foot along that towpath, contains about 3.5 tons of water. And you can imagine the amount of water that's required and the weight. Now, this water was always testing the integrity of the canal. It seeped into the soil. It sought weak points in the banks, especially banks like this, which don't have anything behind them but river. It leaked out of aqueducts, and it leaked out of locks. What amounted to the liquid pavement of this highway was in a constant state of suspense, awaiting an event, be it a storm, an operational accident, an act of sabotage, which there were, or a simple muskrat hole, to change the dynamic, cause a breach, and let the water out of the canal. Now, if we go up one more spot, and we were talking about, see, here's the Pequabic coming in. This is where we were looking over first. This is the little bend that we were just looking at here. But up here in October of 1843, right in this area between the mill and Pitkins Basin, one of these things happened. There was a big storm, and they couldn't dump the water out the waste weirs fast enough. There was a breach in the towpath. The boat full of coal from Pennsylvania went into the Farmington River. This picture's wrong because the animals aren't over there. The animals are on the towpath on this side, but the guy didn't know, so he put them over there. And here is an account of it from the newspaper, and I won't stop to read it, but just to show you, it describes the horrible storm and how it didn't stop and all the funny things that happened, and by gosh, it's in the river and it's documented right here. So that's that. And now we can go upriver, as I promised, and get ourselves over to where the water came from, because most of the water in the Farmington Canal came from the Farmington River.
Can we ask questions while you're talking?
Go right ahead, please. I usually say that ahead of time, but I'm discombobulated. Speak up.
Did they have eminent domain where they can take person's property to make this canal?
They could take anything they wanted to. The commissioners came by afterwards and assessed damages, and people were paid off according to what the commissioners said the damages were. And this included not only land for digging the canal, but land where spoil had been piled, or changes in water level where land couldn't do what it used to do anymore, because this canal was not lined with clay to make it waterproof. This canal was just fed water until the water table changed enough so it pushed back. The only places that they puddled with clay were where you had an aqueduct or a lock meeting the edge of the canal, basically stone or wood to sand, where it did need some puddling. But otherwise, there was only one little place in Plainville and one place in Hampton that wouldn't accept all the water, or accepted more water than they could put into it, and they had to puddle. So a lot of times people found they could grow things before the canal and not afterwards, because the water table had changed, including some cases right here in Simsbury, down south of town in Weetag.
Where did that feeder start, that 6 mile feeder?
I didn't hear.
Where did that 6 mile feeder start? Was it in Unionville?
It's a 3 mile feeder, and we're going there next. So you'll see. This is the dam on the Farmington River, which was a different river then than it is now. It's been changed with dams and one thing and another. But as it is, what we're showing here is the 1828 map. You can see the dam, you can see the headworks, and you can see the feeder canal taking off from the headworks, heading over towards the main canal. The pond above the dam was extensive. It stretched about 3/4 of a mile towards Unionville, almost up to Roaring Brook. This is an 1829 map of Farmington, and it shows the stone dam, the pond, 3/4 of a mile up the river. It shows the feeder going off up towards the top by Mr. Thompson's house. Notice Mr. Gridley's house, the next one there, right by the side of the pond, next to what's now Route 3, I guess. Just keep Mr. Gridley's house in mind. We're going to take another reference to that. This is the map that I was referring to, which shows why it takes 6 miles to climb 25 feet to get the water in the canal, because it comes from over here behind the feeder dam, down the feeder, all the way over, across the aqueduct, and then down 3 miles of canal on the other side of the river until it finally gets down here where we were looking over the edge to see the canal here and the river there. So it's come 6 miles to get up that 25 feet. Not that it was ever below the 25 feet to begin with, but I mean, it took that long to overcome that difference in distance. This is the 34 aerial. I'm showing the site of the dam, the site of the headworks, which is just above the dam. It's Route 4, not Route 3. Okay, and here we got the feeder canal coming off and going across Route 4 and over into what by that time is a big sand pit. So it's cut in half. Now this is a very interesting picture. This is in 1932 a picture of the headworks. This is where the dam met the edge of the river, and then there was a hole through which water could pass from the pond into the feeder. And it probably was closed with planks on their sides just to regulate the amount of water that could go through. Now we're looking down from the pond side into the mouth of the feeder, and we've got this stone here and stone here, and this would more or less been the width of the mouth of the feeder, not much wider than a canal boat. And the interesting thing to notice here is back here. There's a house. That house is still there. It was a brand new summer house in 1932. It's now been reconditioned to be an all-weather house, around the season house, but by then it was a summer house. And that helps a lot in location. The towpath would have started here and extended down here under the house. This is the same picture, the same time, the same photographer looking the other way. There's the headworks that we were just looking at one side and the other side. Here's the river down here. There's the approximate north end of the dam, the approximate level of water in the pond to flow into the feeder, which is down here towards the bottom and flowing behind. This tree on the extreme right, underneath where it says approximate, also keep in mind, because here's the same site today. I think that in the blue is the same tree. The house is behind us. The towpath is on the white line. The site of the feeder is inside the circle, but of course everything has been wiped out with modernization or floods or what have you. But this is the site where the headworks was and took water from the pond behind the dam. It almost has to be here because you need space on the side of the river wide enough to carry the feeder canal, which was built to the same specifications as the main canal. And any further up, there's simply no side to the river to put a feeder canal on. It just falls, almost directly into the river. So there's no terrace. If you turn around, there's our house. We're standing where the headworks would have been. This is feeder canal filled in here, but look at how this fence dips as it goes across the yard, because this is the old feeder canal right here. This house is on the towpath here. And there is a profile of the feeder canal heading down that way.
Carl, the feeder canal actually was used for transportation also?
It was originally built to the same specifications as the main canal because in their early headstrong days, there was a faction of stockholders who wanted to extend this to the New York state line to the Hudson River, where it would then be able to communicate with the Erie. After they really found out how expensive it was to do this and how many troubles they had, that idea was dropped after several years. But in anticipation of that, when they built the feeder, they built it to normal specifications so it could be used to go west. As it turned out, it went less than all the way to Unionville, but here it is. Let's see, I gotta go this way now. This is the site of the dam. It looked probably something like that. It's a stone dam. The stones are held together with iron rods. It's 10 feet high, 198 feet long, 5 feet wide at the bottom. No, 7 feet wide at the bottom and 3 feet wide at the top. And there it is, so to speak. These are some interesting things that Mr. Hart photographed in 1934 at the site of the dam. I'm not sure exactly what they are. I suspect they have something to do with the dam. I doubt there was any other dam there or any other reason to have them. They may have had to do with the foundations or perhaps a cofferdam they built to make it dry enough to build the dam, or maybe they're on the downstream side of the dam to shield the foundation of the dam from water spilling over the top. I don't know. But all I know is that there they are in 1934. They're not there anymore between 1955 and everything else that went with it. These are some stones at the site, and you can see big stones, the same red sandstone that we have everywhere. This one has a hole bored in it for an iron rod. Here's another picture of the hole. The rest of it, it's stone. It's lying around. It's been there for 180 years. People recycle. That stone went someplace else for another use, I'm sure. But this little bit's still left for some reason. Now we're up river, in the area where the pond was. And we're looking downstream, and we're looking down to the feeder dam, which is 10 feet high way down there in the distance. The headworks is over there where it's marked, a little red spot. everything up here is underwater because this pond reaches 3/4 of a mile upstream, and this is the huge reservoir that supplies the canal between Granby and New Haven with water. There are other supplies, but this is the major supply. In the circle, there's a funny rock, a big rock, right on the edge of the river. We get a little closer, and what do we see? A mooring point. Now, I can't prove it, but it certainly looks period to me. It's in the right place and in the pond at the right place. Mr. Gridley had a canal boat called the American Eagle, and I think when he came home up the feeder, he brought it through the headworks and moored it here. It's right across the street from his house. So there's a little something. I don't know what else it could be. There's really no other reason to have anything like this, but there it is for what it's
Why
worth.
would he have it across the water from his house, not on the same side as his house?
It is on the same side as his
Why
house.
is it across?
No, it's on the same side. Same side as his house. We're looking downstream, so Route 4 is up here, and the house, Gridley's house is, actually, Gridley's house is in front of the library right now. Still stands.
Staples house, Gridley Staples.
Yeah.
Recently painted.
Okay, so we'll go down a little bit more. I don't want to spend too much time, but this, as you can see, is the feeder swinging along like this and across Route 4. There are a few remains of it in there now. Even now, that's the feeder there that you're looking at with the trees growing in it. And this is a picture from the 1930s, in 1933, when it still has water in it in this area. Today, that area kind of looks like this. It's choked with plants and weeds. But this fence down here is the fence we were looking at in the yard of the house next to the headworks. Right there, that fence. Yeah, we're back doing the same thing over again. Okay. And then it follows its way across country. I just show this because there are very few pictures of this around. Nobody took pictures of it before it was destroyed. After World War II, they built houses and it's all gone. This is a picture of the feeder in the area north of Route 4. And there may be another one in here.
Do you know how much it costs per foot or mile or?
To build?
Yes.
Depends on what you're building. I mean, to build this is relatively cheap. To cross a valley is relatively expensive. It just depends on how many people have to work on it, how many hours, and how much earth has to be moved, and how much stone has to be done, and whatever. It's all relatively cheap by modern terms. I mean, the guys were moving sand for 3 cents a yard, but there's really no. I had another way to answer. I guess if you gave me a specific place, I can tell you exactly how much was paid because I've got all the contractors' bills and what they paid for this, doing this and that work on that particular section. So, we might average it out that way per section and get close, but it really depends. I mean, in the Cheshire swamps, it was the most expensive part of all because they were working underwater and they had to saw timber and they had to move the muck, and the horses and the men were up to their necks and all this junk, and it took forever. That was expensive. But just digging across here, we get to Granby, I can show you a section where Pliny Hillier built it across his own land and sent a bill to the canal company. I know how many animals he used and how many man hours he put in and how much he got paid for it. That particular section I can show you with a bill to go with it. But it really depends where you're building and who's doing it. Here's another little section with water in it. Another one. This is all feeder. It doesn't exist any longer. It changes character as you get a little farther east. Up here it starts to wander a little bit, but it's dug into the ground like this. It's a great big heavy thing because it's not on the surface of the ground anymore, but going along the sides of hills. Has to be dug deeper. This would have been more expensive to do. This is all feeder that still exists. This is in Devonwood. And now we come to one of my favorite pictures up here. This is the junction of the feeder coming from the bottom, coming from the dam, to the main canal right here, which is running north to the left to Granby, 16 miles, and right to New Haven, over the aqueduct, down through Farmington and all the other towns, so that this is where the water from the feeder actually enters the canal. And look at this on the map, and look at this, which I love, because when I went there and I thought, oh my God, that's what I saw on the map. To the left is going to the feeder canal and the dam. To the right in the square is going to Granby, and behind us is going over the aqueduct and down to Farmington for 35 more miles. And this is just a picture of the feeder canal heading back from the junction towards the dam. You can see how it's carved out of the side of a hill here. And this spoil is just picked up here and dropped on this side for the towpath. On the other side of this, at the bottom of the hill, is the Farmington Polo Club, or whatever they call themselves down there with the horses, on the side of the river. So that's the feeder. Now, where am I? Oh, I've got to get back over here. Next, we're going to look at the aqueduct. This is, without a doubt, one of the most impressive engineering features on the canal, and absolutely vital to the existence of the canal. When you're building the canal up from Plainville, it becomes obvious that you have to stay on the west side of the Farmington River as it flows north, because the terrain on the east side of the river as you get up towards Simsbury and Granby is not high enough to support the canal. So you've got to stay on the west side of the river. The original plan and the engineering plan, and some of the stockholders who were parsimonious wanted to build a canal along the Pequabic River and then pass it across the Farmington River in the pond behind the dam. This would have been a very economical thing to do because the water was there. You just pop from one side of the river to the other across the pond. Well, all well and good, but this thing isn't called the Farmington Canal because it's called the Farmington Canal because of what I showed you earlier. This is a big market, and the merchants in Farmington want it there. And James Hillhouse, who was the mover and shaker behind this in New Haven, he wanted to go to Farmington to satisfy these people. And if you take it to the center of Farmington, how the heck are you going to get across the river? Well, you've got to build an aqueduct. So not only does this support trade to the center of Farmington and get water to New Haven, which you couldn't get there any other way, but it also gets you across the river to the proper terrain to go farther north. It's a really important structure. The more you look at it, the more important it seems. So here's the aqueduct. The canal is coming north here along the edge of Route 10. This is Route 10 here. And then it bends and starts to cross the Farmington River Valley. Farmington River Valley is 1,400 feet wide at this point and about 35 feet deep between the top of the ridge where the canal is at 182.5 feet above sea level and water level. So somehow you've got to get the canal across 3.5 stories of void, which is 1,400 feet long. Now, how the hell do you do it? Well, basically what they did was to fill each side of the valley with sand. These lines along the outside indicate how much land had to be seized from local owners to build a canal. And where it's wide like this, they're either digging a hole or they're filling a hole. And you can see the width of land that had to be taken to pile sand in the valley to get it to 182.5 feet above sea level at river's edge on both sides. In between, where they couldn't put sand, they built the aqueduct, which is 280 feet long with 6 piers and 7 spans. It's a big trough filled with water, about 300 tons of water, and it conducts boats across the river.
What material did they make the aqueduct out of?
Sorry?
What material did they make the aqueduct out of?
Well, the piers are made out of the regular red sandstone, some of which was quarried in Simsbury right across the river here and taken down on barges. and others were taken from the same quarries that were used to make the buildings at the original Avon Old Farm School. Those were the sources of stone. We have a bill of timbers about how they put the rest of it together, and that was mainly chestnut and oak, and it was supplied from local contractors, I suppose, wherever they get it. But these were big timbers they used. They were 10 by 12s, 40 feet long, and lots of them, probably 84 of them, that big, and lots of smaller stuff. I am currently building a model of the aqueduct, which is going to be 10 feet long when it's done. And I've got the bill of timbers, and I've got some old pictures of it in decay. And so I'm building all of these timbers by hand and assembling them. And it's kind of instructive in terms of how it all went together. I've had to actually consult with a guy who has written a book about old timber joining. They call it carpentry now, but it was called joining then, about how you put timbers together without metal. And so he's been able to advise me about how to join things together. It makes a lot of difference with the dimensions. But this is a tremendous structure. There's a picture of it. I don't know when it was done, but I don't think it's contemporary. I think it's done probably in the 1870s. This is a more modern picture done in the 1970s by a guy who did a series on the canal. This is Raymond Holden's 1972. It's a bad picture, but there is no better picture for getting the idea across as to how the thing worked and why it's there, because you can see a boat being pulled across the river about 3.5 stories above the river. There's 6 or 8 big boo-boos in here, but we'll ignore them because it shows how it worked.
What are the boo-boos?
Oh, the piers are wrong. They're built of the wrong stuff. The railing is wrong. They got the wrong animals. What else have they got here? There are a bunch of other ones.
Should they be horses rather than?
Yes, they would have been horses rather than mules. This part down below is probably true. I don't know. They look like they're fishing, but people actually were afraid to pass over this thing on a boat. They got off and walked down to the river and came across and got back on the other side. It's a big thing. Nobody had ever seen anything like that. Here is a picture of it in roughly 1882 or so, of it in decay, and you can see girders underneath falling off. You can see part of the trunk up here collapsing, and then you can see stringers going across and the props holding up the centers. The west abutment's over here. The east abutment is off the edge of the picture, I believe. This Pier 2, Pier 1 is over here, and then the abutment, so this isn't even the whole thing. This is a picture of what it looked like in 1935, and then I've sort of added back what really was there. It's a big, impressive structure. And there are, as I say, 6...
Noah Wallace's house, by the way, if you know the school.
Up on top there, on the east, or the north abutment, he built a house up there in the canal.
Can you help me with where this is? This is above where Route 4 crosses the Farmington River. It's north or
If you
south?
go, you go from Route 44, just go south down Old Farms Road. No, what's it called? What's
About half a mile south of where...
on Route 10, whatever it's called. I've forgotten now. What's Route 10 called? Waterville Road. You just go down there until you cross over the line into Farmington, and it's right on your right, just around the first corner. There's a sign up that says Farmington Canal crossed here. That's the aqueduct site. This is the fill that I was talking about on the south side or the east side of the river. It doesn't look too impressive here. Here's a bit of the stonework of a wraparound wing wall on the southern abutment. But this is 3.5 stories between the top and the bottom of the river down here, and it fills the entire valley way off, again as far and more off the right side of the picture until it gets to Route 10. It's a big, monstrous fill. This is the first pier and part of the southern abutment. Southern abutment has decayed since the canal went out of business. Been a lot of erosion behind it. This is the only picture we have of the first pier. which was subsequently demolished and became part of the first Farmington Town Hall, I understand. This is a picture some 60 years later with the decay continuing and the pier missing. These are the bottoms of the first 3 piers, which again were accessible and taken as a source of stone for one project or another, be it municipal or private, I don't know, but they're not there anymore. These are the 3 that were hard to get to, so they were still standing until 1955. And you can see 4, 5, and 6. And out here, underneath that line, is the wing wall of the northern abutment. There's masonry up in here. This is a good picture because it shows in the shadow here the little shelves that are built in to catch the bottoms of the props that support the centers of the spans, so that the weight of the water in the center of a span was taken along the props and transmitted to the shelf on the pier, where it was canceled by a prop coming from the other side, and then the whole weight of the water on the center of the pier transferred down to the riverbed, which is built on a stone outcropping. The piers are built on a stone outcropping, so that you have the water being supported directly on the stone on the bottom of the river.
Do those piers still exist?
Till 55 they did. They came out in the hurricane. This is one of the last pictures ever taken of them, because it's taken by Mr. Hart, one of the last pictures he ever took in his life, summer of 55, just before the storm came. And after that, there was chaos and no more. But to give you some idea of the scale of these piers, there are the piers. These are people. People, people, people. They're big things. There's some people sitting around having a picnic at the bottom of the 6th pier. This is the north abutment up here.
When was that aqueduct built?
1826, $14,000 total. This is a view across the top of the pier. The piers, which shows the remains of the horns, which rose up on either side of the trough to hold it in place. These are some nice old pictures. I love this one. There's a time lapse. Obviously, the river is flowing, and those are the remains of the timbers, but shortly before they fell in. And then just to show you, when the hurricane came in 55, the water went up to the level of the black line and eroded behind the upstream wraparound wing wall, which is the counterpart of the one that's outlined here, and then got behind the main part of the abutment. And the house fell in, and the piers fell down, and it got to be a big mess, so that this was all that was left. Afterwards, we've got the downstream wraparound wing wall, but the main part of the abutment and the upstream wing wall are gone, and you can see the poor piers have been truncated, and the remains of the house are here and here and washed away. And then the Corps of Engineers came and did its thing and wiped out anything that remained except a little bit of the downstream wraparound wing wall, which still stands and is still very impressive. Okay, enough of that. Just to impress that is a very, very important structure. Very difficult to build. Nobody locally had the expertise to do it. Joseph P. Ennis and company from Niagara County, New York, came over here and took the contract to build that. And they did that because they probably had experience building similar things on the Erie. Now I want to show you something that's not there anymore, and I can't show you any pictures of it because there are no pictures of it. It disappeared before it was photographed. I don't know when and I don't know how, but I have some suspicions. Now this is Thompson Brook in Avon, southern Avon, just north of Fisher Farm. We have a brook and a small valley crossing the line of the canal. This is just south of Avon Old Farm School. And you somehow have to get the canal across this brook, which is a fairly good-sized brook. And it also has a valley, which is about 25 feet lower than the level of the canal. Again, what was seized is between the black lines, and this has to be filled so that you can take the canal across. Now, in 1932, we've got this funny little thing. The funny little thing is an arch. Looks very much like an arch culvert of canal origin. It's built the same way, using the same materials. It's in the right place, but it's got a couple of problems. One is that it's only about 10 feet wide enough to carry a road, but not wide enough to carry the canal and its fill, for which you need about a 120-foot long tunnel. And it's a little too narrow. It's only got a 9-foot span, which should have at least 12 or 15-foot span on the arch. So it's not there. And I don't know why it's there, but I suspect that, again, Noah Wallace, when he bought all this land before he sold it to Theodate Pope, had himself a fishing and hunting club there. And this is a stream which is between the fishing and hunting club and that building that we saw on the top of the aqueduct, which also he built. It's on what's a main road through the woods, which is basically the bottom of the old canal. Somebody needed a way to get across this, so I think a replica was built of what was originally there. There's no way this is a canal structure. But the important thing about this picture is this, the black line, because the black line is the level that the canal went across the valley at. And we keep that in mind as we go forward here. Here is standing down by that little culvert at the bottom in the stream and looking south. The white line is the bottom of the canal looking south. So that is what has to be filled between that place and the other side of the brook. Now, here we have a contemporary map showing the canal, which is shown as a road. And here we see fill coming out like this. And we show fill coming out like this. Not high enough, but still there, at least in traces. The site of the culvert is there. The old towpath is here at just about the right elevation. And we got these two little lumps here, which are borrow pits. The borrow pits are where they took the earth to fill the valley. And if I do this and overlay the original canal map on top of this modern map, we see that the fill that they're calling for pretty much matches the contour map. The borrow pits are about in the same place. And towpaths, everything is just about the way it ought to be. So although it's not there anymore, and I don't know what happened to it, I suspect what happened is that after the canal went out of business, either the tunnel collapsed and was obstructed, or else beavers got in the pond, in the stream above, and built a huge dam which obstructed it. Either way, a large pond must have built up north of this fill and eventually just blasted its way through there and took most of it away. This is the southern borrow pit, which is the bigger one. We're standing on the edge of the canal looking west into the borrow pit, and this gives you some idea of the immensity of this pit, which was emptied to take earth to fill that valley. Here's the northern borrow pit, which is a good deal smaller. This is a ridge between the two. And then when we look down from the top of the northern smaller borrow pit, we get some idea of the dimensions of this. And it's like 2 stories down to the bottom, maybe more from the top down there. There's a lot of earth was taken out of there and carted along the floor of the canal right down that way and then dumped in the valley as they went along to fill the valley on top of the culvert. And here is the little relic. The original culvert would have had its upstream arch behind the photographer, just immediately behind the photographer, and indeed until quite recently there were remains of it still there. You can see how the channel has been narrowed to build the new one so that the original span was an arch like this, not like this. And I guess that's about all we have to say about this. It's a large engineering achievement. Now, let's go farther up to the center of Avon. And while we got the map, I'll just say it doesn't show too much on the old map, but Avon in the center of town is located on the top of a ridge which runs out like this toward the river. Now, if the canal is coming along on the long level and has to go around that ridge, it has to do that, and that's extra expense in construction and lengthens the length of the canal and the time of travel and whatever. So as they were able, they decided they'd just dig right through the ridge, and that's what they did. And that's why on the canal map of downtown Avon, although this is a junction of the Hartford-Albany Turnpike and Route 10 going north and south and the canal a major, major source of trade and commerce at that time, if ever there was one. We do not have the canal basins for loading and unloading goods in the center of town. They're located outside town where the canal is at ground level, both the South Basin and the North Basin. In the center of town, because of this ridge, the freight house right here is about 15 feet below the level of the road. And if you're unloading heavy things, you don't want to haul them up 15 feet to get to the wagons. So the basins for ground level on and off are both sides of town rather than downtown.
Did they always have to stop at loading docks, or could they unload anywhere along the canal?
They could do anything they wanted to do. You know, they had to stop to pay tolls certain places, and one of them would have been Avon. But you know, otherwise, if a farmer wanted something unloaded, they could unload it. This was all very informal. The little tramp boats would be going up and down. They'd do maybe a mile or two an hour and take their time. Time didn't mean anything like it does today in those days. Now,
was it wide enough for both to
oh yes,
buy
absolutely.
each other?
Yeah, right. I've skipped dimensions and things like that tonight because I wanted to get through this stuff, but it's wide enough to pass. Yeah, it's about 36 feet wide on the surface, and the boats are no more than 12 feet wide. This is south of Avon, down near Columbus Circle, looking north, and you can.
Towpath Farm, if you know. Anybody who knows Avon, it's called Towpath Farm, built 1760 and still stands. Beautiful house. This is the backyard.
Anyway, there's an 80-foot wide cut, about 20, 25 feet deep, right here through the center of the ridge from the south. And here we are looking farther north a little bit. You can see it's a great big cut, runs from here to here, and that's the ridge that we have to get through. It's too high for the canal to pass unless you dig it. And somebody's built a house right in the middle of it. You know, on the deck of the house, you can look back and see the towpath running along the side here. It's been shelved into the side of the hill since the towpath can't be higher than 2 feet above the water. And there is where the canal used to run, and this is the great cut here. The proof of that is this old picture of the freight house in the middle of Avon. This is Route 44 running east and west before it's paved, but you got to know that the top of the canal is at the bottom of this door. So if you unload goods down there, you've got to carry them up to this level to get them to the ground level, which is why the basins are at this level, but south and north of town where this ridge is not. So in those days, it used to pass through the center of town like that, and there was a bridge carrying Route 44 across this huge ditch, which is no longer there. Wasn't even there when this was taken. But it's commemorated by this stone, and now I think they have another one on the other side to match. And this is where the canal crossed through that ditch through the center of Avon. Also still there is this building, which is next to the church on the corner of 10 and 44. This is a building that was built in 1826 or 28, I've forgotten. But it was built specifically for canal use. It's a large office building, a very unusual structure at that time, in that every room in that building is accessible directly from either an outside door or from a hallway. So you don't have to interrupt other people doing business when you're going in and out or between offices. It was built to accommodate factors from other canals or traders who were bringing things to and from the canal. Place where merchants could have their offices. It's also possible, entirely, probably likely, that the Avon toll collectors from the canal company had their offices there, and there may even have been some major or minor engineering offices there, since it's almost halfway between New Haven and Northampton at this point.
So the church is just off to the right?
Yes, exactly. The church is right over here, and that building still stands. Okay, now we're out of Avon and we'll go up to Simsbury, and I want to show you Canal Place, because Canal Place it's in this area right here. It's still there pretty much. This is a picture from 1932. It shows canal with water still in it. It just by happenstance. One end of it was dammed because a farmer wanted it dammed, and the other end had a waste weir, and it was closed on that end. And so nobody bothered it, and it kept water in it, and it overgrew some. But I mean, this is like 80 years after it was abandoned, and it's, all things considered, not too bad. This is what it looks like in 1941 in the winter, but this is the canal running up and down there. And you may see this tree again. And there it is again, 1941. These are Mr. Sweeten's pictures when he was young and interested in the canal. This is what it looks like now. And this is called Canal Place. It was a restoration done as part of the conditions for building those condos or apartments or whatever it is they did down there. They had to preserve this section of the canal. It doesn't always look this nice, but it's still there. So that's what canal would have looked like with water in it. And if we go up one more spot, I can show you what it looked like without water in it, because we're up to Latimer Hill. This is just across the street from Latimer Hill School, and Latimer Lane is behind us going up and down the hill. But this shows how the canal was built in this part of the state, where you're not on flat ground, but you're building along hillsides to preserve the long level. And basically it's what we saw before, where the hillside was torn away here to create the prism, and the spoil piled up on the lower slope to make the towpath. And this is still used as a jogging trail today. Okay, now I'm going to show you now kind of like Thompson Brooke Culvert looked like before it wasn't there anymore. Now, this is the Hop Brook Culvert right here in Simsbury, across from Ensign Bickford, right by their parking lot. Basically, well, I go back. Basically what's happening here is that you have Hop Brook, which is sizable, and it needs to be crossed with a little valley that goes around it on a fill, which is this wide. It's basically 110 feet wide like this, and maybe 2 stories or 2.5 stories high. And it has to be made wide enough so the canal can actually turn on top of it. So it's a little wider than it had or normally would have been. This is what it looked like in 1932. When it was in operation, it looked probably something more like that, which is what I was describing down at Thompson Brook before it all disappeared. But this is more or less what Thompson Brook would have looked like. And the canal's crossing from right to left or left to right up on top of there, and there's the tunnel that it passed through, or that passed under it. These are just a bunch of pictures. This is the only arch culvert on the entire canal that has keystones. As you can see, there's a keystone here. This is the upstream keystone, which faced the main road in those days. What's now Route 10 was just a subsidiary little road to a bridge across the river, and that's changed around. But here is the keystone on the west end. It has the main contractor's initials and the date carved into it. This is a picture of the tunnel after it's collapsed, but it's good to show the method of construction. And basically how they built these things was to build a wooden form, in this case 110 feet long and probably 16-foot span, I think is what I remember. And on top of it they would pile rubble and hydraulic cement and let it harden and then take the form away. And this lasted very well. Sometimes, the last one caved in 2008. I don't think there are any others still standing, in entirety anyway. But the problem is you have water collecting in the old ditch on top and seeping through the sandy soil and getting into the mortar and the stones, and constant cycles of freezing and thawing. Look at these icicles down here. And sooner or later, things come loose and things fall in, and generally it's the middle that goes first, and the stones fall in, and then the sand falls in, and then it deteriorates as time goes by further. But there it was, just in a series of pictures. This is what happened in 1955. Hop Brook got so big it just went around the whole thing, and eventually, as it dried out, this upper arch collapsed. And there is about all that remains today. We're looking downstream at the inner end of the downstream arch. It still stands and still has its keystone, and it has on it, now facing the main road, the subcontractor's initials and dates. So next we want to do downtown Simsbury. Sorry?
That's by the Flower Bridge then, where Hop Brook is?
Oh no, the Flower Bridge is over the river. This is if you go down Route 10 to Ensign Bickford, you know where their parking lot is on the right-hand side.
Oh, I guess you can still see a little bit,
Yeah, if you go in their parking lot and look over the left side of the parking lot into the brook, you'll see this arch. And it used to extend 110 feet upstream to a lump, which is the base of the old Route 10 that used to run north and south, which was where the main contractor had his keystone on that end.
The one West Street condos are on the corner there.
Yes, right.
And
This is behind them
There's the parking lot.
on the other side of the parking lot, right?
And then
Right.
an arch.
As a matter of fact, the house that used to stand where the condos are is in one of the pictures I showed here of the
Horace Belden's
yeah.
house. Yes.
of the arch. So here we are in downtown Simsbury. The burying ground is there where it still is. And Phelps House is here where it still is. And the Historical Society is over about here. And this is Plank Road, I think, Plank Hill Road. Yeah, the Canal House, which is now the Historical Society. And it went through the center of town. There's a bunch of stuff I can show you for documents, but I'm not going to take the time at this point because we're late. This is a recent picture that was commissioned by Mr. Sweeten before he died, but it does show the house in the center of town, Phelps House, and the canal going right by under a bridge, and this is more or less what it looked like. This is a very unusual thing because this is at about 1850 daguerreotype of the Phelps House, which overlooked the canal. Now, I don't know for sure, but it seems to me that the road is probably along here where there's a little fence. This is the bottom of the hill and the steps coming down to it. And here we have what seems to be a picket fence, which I am imagining probably separates the road from the canal, or maybe it's the canal is between the fence and the road. I can't really tell. The road was much narrower then than it is now. But this is what the Phelps house looked like back then, when Lucy Phelps wrote her letters to her grandfather describing canal boats going by in front of the house.
That's Mrs. Amos Arino right up there. Lucy's
Okay.
house. Yeah.
Well, that I didn't know. Oh, I don't want to do that. I want to go back this way. Now I can go frontwards. This is how it went through the center of town to the best that we can reconstruct using the canal maps and old data and newspaper accounts and town records, land records, whatever. This all came about because the people in the Methodist Church wanted to know where their original church was, and they didn't know. Well, it turns out it was this green square right here. This is the width of Hot Meadow Street today, from here all the way over to there, like this. But the Methodist Church used to sit right in the middle of the street. This is, why don't I get smart and put the labels on? There's the canal house there. The Ezra Pratt house was standing when the canal was in operation, and the canal did pass behind it. And there was a bridge that carried Phelps Road across the canal, and another bridge, supposedly an ugly yellow bridge that carried Route 10 across the canal. And then south of there, it just goes along the terrace, along the side of Route 10. And you notice all the buildings south of the cemetery have this long green, flat green in front of them, and that's because that's where the canal ran all the way down there to the corner. And so that's why they all have flat green front yards. And then north here, it just ran behind Ezra Pratt and then up behind all these buildings, including the firehouse and so on. The current Methodist Church, which is this building here with a canal boat in it, is built pretty much in the canal. This is the length and breadth of a canal boat, this brown thing there. There's a picture of the canal house, which is now the Historical Society, with the narrow road in front of it. Okay, so next let's go, where am I here? Arch Culvert. Oh, this. Something you guys probably don't know about, but you should be aware of. That canal in the northern well, the northern central part of town, by Owensbrook Boulevard. The canal crossed over a fill over the little valley that used to be around Owensbrook, and Owensbrook Boulevard runs like that. And you can see the extra land that had to be taken to fill the little valley around it. But in that little valley, I get through this stuff, right down in here is the little culvert that carries Owensbrook under what used to be the canal fill. This is a picture from 1932 or 33, something like that, 32. It's only 4-foot span, and it has a tunnel. I don't know how long, because I think the upstream end of the tunnel is gone. It was broken down or collapsed or whatever when the fill was removed or whenever. This is another picture of the masonry. This is what the downstream end looks like today. It happened to be full of water when I was there, not draining well. And there it is there, right inside the black circle of the fill going across the top at the white line. The upstream end, as I said, is no longer there. That's just irrelevant at this point. Now I'm going to go up here. Canal bed. Am I done here? I guess I'm done here. 5 foot.
Charles Rufus Hart meticulously recorded the dimensions of each of these little culverts.
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely.
That's how you know
He was an engineer, absolutely. This is a stretch of canal which is up by Simsbury Pharmacy and Lavery. What were they? What's the appliance? Holloway's is what I want to say. They're on the other side, on the east side, where it says College Highway, just near Walcott Road. This little piece of canal that I have outlined there, looks like California, is interesting because it carries 6 barns. It used to carry 6 barns. It's got 5 there now. All of these barns are built in the canal bed, which, as you saw, does this bend. And those bends are barn. 6 barns. They're all 40 feet wide. They all fit right in the canal. The canal uses a foundation, and they scoot right along like that. There are all 6 of them in a row. They're all, you can see how flat their foundations are. That's all the level of the canal, and they all wind along on top of the path of the canal. And there's a little culvert that used to take Saxton Brook underneath the fill between the barns. That's really not there too much anymore. It's just this pipe serving the same function. Okay, now, one more in the top of Simsbury, and I don't know, is everybody getting tired? You want to quit, or you want to go to Granby afterwards?
I'd like to see a little of Granby.
Yeah, but I've only got like 3 sites in Granby, but I just show you. I just have no way of knowing. I mean, I'll go on and on and on until everybody falls asleep. So if you get tired, let me know. I'm getting there. It's almost not done, but we're getting there. Now, if we go up here to Money Sunk Brook, we got another situation kind of like we had at Thompson Brook, where there was something there that isn't there anymore. Again, this is Money Sunk Brook. Lake Basile is currently up here, but it used to be in canal days just a brook that had to pass under the canal with a rather large fill, as you can see, to fill the valley that Money Sunk Brook runs through. There's not much to look at here, but there's something. This is looking south, or looking north along the canal at the south side of Lake Basile, which is the blue patch in the background there. The canal is running along the surface of the land and out onto a fill that's going to cross where Money Sunk Brook used to be. But because of erosion, the canal, or what's left of the canal, slopes down towards the pond at this point. Unnaturally, the actual bottom of the canal would have been up here, all the way out there and across. So this is sort of a jumping off place. Looking back towards where we just were, the canal would have been up there like that, with 2 feet of freeboard atop and the towpath up at the top of the gray line. And the fill would have continued all the way across the bottom of Lake Basile. This is kind of another view of the same thing. This is the towpath up here. The canal prism used to go down like that, and then up like this, and then there was another big fill over here on top of this sandy area here, which carried the canal across the brook. Here's the towpath on the one side that still exists. And this is what it looked like at the time, where it just crossed the entire valley with a towpath on the side. Away from us, you can see the little tunnel with a culvert going underneath, and Money Sunk Brook was over here, coming in from the right. Does it show? Yeah, it shows. And how do we know all this? Because my friend Mark Banks went down there and he found these nice things to show me. These are the bottom, the downstream ends of the wraparound wing walls of the culvert, which is long since gone for multiple reasons. But this part of the masonry still remains. You can see how it's curving. It's obviously a wing wall, and it's a downstream wing wall. That'd be the downstream end of the tunnel that carried the stream underneath this fill. This is looking now off the east side of the fill. The railroad is coming in from the left to join the canal at this point, and the top of the fill is the white line, and the bottom of the remaining fill with the towpath on it, it's in the circle right there. So that's another one of something that's no longer there, but you can reconstruct in your mind's eye. Now we're going to something spectacular, which is the great 40-foot arch over Salmon Brook in Granby. You could see again another big fill. Salmon Brook is a substantial stream. It drains about 33 square miles up into Massachusetts and is subject to great rises and falls, certainly in the times when the canal was in operation. This had to be built 3 times before it finally took. It was built twice as a 30-foot arch, and both times it washed out slightly soon after it was constructed, and they finally decided against an aqueduct and made another attempt at 40 feet, and that stood the test of time. And here it is, a monster 40-foot arch, the second largest in the country at the time it was built. And you can see the wraparound wing wall here on the downstream side, and on that side, the great arch, and the canal on top. It's on top when this picture was taken, is the railroad, and it's higher than the level of the canal because they've added extra fill to accommodate the railroad. But the line there is about where the canal was. I don't know if I've got any line. No, there's a person for scale. That actually is Mr. Hart's daughter, Elizabeth, in 1932 or 32. A very impressive structure and very carefully built because this was the 3rd time that attempted it, and they had definite specifications for the masonry. And you can see it has a cut stone ring and the usual rubble and hydraulic cement arch, and the same on the outside. The whole thing is covered and filled with sand. A detail of how it's all put together. Inside, the foundations of these are great timbers, like 10 by 12s, running at 90 degrees to the flow of the stream underneath, like this, and then a stone wall built on top of those, and then the arch constructed on top of that to go over the top. And then when it's done, the entire bottom is planked, as you can see here, parallel with the flow of the stream to help the stream pass through without disturbing the foundations. And here's a picture of it running off the edge of the planks as it comes out the downstream end. A beautiful, beautiful big structure until 1934, when Salmon Brook did one of its things, and someplace it found a weak point in the middle of the masonry, and down it came. And once one starts, it all falls in, and the sand on top follows. So we got railway rails in here, we got people up here looking at the hole. There's the bottom of the arch starting over there. But a big disaster. And again, there is a detail of the masonry, which is substantially the same as what we saw in Simsbury. The contract for building it is here, but I won't take the time to go look at it. And these are just pictures of the railway guys. There's the bottom of the arch starting up there. They're going to go fix it up. They brought their pile drivers in, and they're building a trestle across. This is 1934. That trestle stood until 1955 when it went out and the current bridge was built. So there have been 6 bridges across that since canal times. And there, that stood, I don't know how long that stood, but I suspect until 55, when probably the water got high and got behind it and just pulled the whole thing down. These are pictures from 1941. Today, all you see is the bottom of the downstream arch, starting to arch up and over. It used to come up and over and then down on this side, and then it stretched all the way up here. It did the same thing on the other side. You can see that's all that's left of it. Next, we'll go up to Holcomb's Basin. And Holcomb's Basin is the port of Granby. And this is where Granby's 6 canal boats, Commerce, Connecticut, Independence, Neptune, Orient, Sachem, and Union, were based. And there was a freight house inside that small circle up there where it says Route 189. This was a large basin. It extended from the canal all the way up to Route 189. And part of it still exists. I get over this stuff. Here it is in 1933. The towpath goes across the bottom like this, and then the canal goes out over that way. Here it is with a little water in it. This is about half of the basin. The rest of it goes off the right side of the screen, but because of a brook coming down from across 189, it is gradually silted up so that there's nothing much over there except swamp or even some land at this point. The only part with water in it is the part down near the towpath. Again, there's towpath going across the bottom, and the white line being the towpath and exiting over there towards Lock 6 off the edge of the screen. And as you can see over here on the right, it's silting up, and stuff is starting to grow even back in the early 1930s. This is what it looked like in 1991. Silted up over here. I was interested in finding the freight house, and it took me about a decade or more to do it. But the freight house was located over there in that area someplace. It no longer exists, but it's tantalizing because we got a picture of it. Mr. Hart copied this picture, and I don't know where he got it. He called it a lock house. It's not. It's a freight house. It's the Granby Freight House, and he took this picture, or copied this picture, in 1938. When it was taken, I don't know, but it's clearly in a state of collapse. There were similar freight houses like this in other towns. This one is the freight house in Plainville. It was standing and in good condition like this. This is like a 1908 picture when it was finally torn down. But it has a masonry foundation here up to the top of the water, and then timber and planking up above. Boats can pull up here and load into any of the 3 floors with a block and tackle on the top, and then stuff can be trundled across to the other side where there are counterparts to these doors on the other end of the building, which load down to wagons. So this is a standard freight house design. And here it is in Granby, but where to place this thing, I just did not know because the terrain doesn't look right and nothing seems right. But it makes sense to me now. Over here it looks blank, and it's blank, and maybe even looks a little bit like water, I don't know. But there's a little office off the side of it. I've got letters from a guy who was almost born in this part of it. He describes it, but he doesn't say where it is. It drives me crazy. So I spent a long time looking for this thing, and I think I finally found it. This is 1965 aerial survey. It shows Holcomb's Basin down here, what left of it, and silted up here. There's 189. This is the towpath. The towpath is down here where it says towpath. What I have, Holcomb's Basin 1828, is an actual overlay of the original engineering map on what's there now. And you can see that it extends up as far as 189, just the way it should. The top half is all silted in. This rectangle up here where it says site of freight house, which is parallel to the basin, is what's on the original map. But if you look in the 1965, we have this rectangular structure here at the right place. And I think that when you measure it out, is just about the proper dimensions, although it's not the same shape as they're showing on the canal map. That's the right place. And it existed, let's see, no, I haven't got it in here. At any rate, it's off the edge of a hill. So you can approach it by land down an old road, which shows on the 1828 map that red road going from the top down towards the left bottom. And then off it, there's a road to the freight house. And that's the road that you see coming up to the freight house in the pictures I was showing. And then if you look at the freight house from the end, this would be the basin out here at the bottom right. And the ramp going up to the road I showed you going out to the other road is this one here. And it's oriented such that the doors for loading wagons are here. There's the road going out to the other road that goes up to 189, and the other end would undoubtedly have had the same doors, which here's the masonry, the same as we had in Plainville, keeps the water out of the freight house down below, and the boats would pull up out here and block and tackle up and down and goods across the floor. So I'm pretty sure that's where it was. Can't prove it because there's nothing there now. And that's the best I can do, but I'm pretty sure that's right. Now, I got a couple more things and we're done. If you're game for it?
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to look at the locks here. I'm not going to show you all the locks because there's really not that much to look at. We've got Holcomb's Basin down here off the bottom where we just were. And then we've got a series of locks. Number 6 is down below. Then there's a little holding basin, and then 5 and 4 and 3, 2 and 1 as we are going up the hill that the locks are climbing. This is the 34 aerial, which shows Holcomb's Basin down here. The canal passes across like this, right along like this, up into here. And then we're going to see lock 6. That little basin is a holding basin, and then lock 5, 189, crossing lock 4, 3, 2, and 1, all the way to the top of the hill. We're now at the level of the Hampshire and Hampton Canal in the Congamon Ponds, which is what we need to do. We leave the long level. We no longer have water coming from the Farmington River here because we're at another level about 37 feet higher, and this water all has to come from the Congamon Ponds or somewhere. So that's what's happening there. This is the canal. And notice the width of the canal. This is the towpath. We're looking south towards lock 5, which is down there behind the red barn. This house is actually the lock keeper's, one of the lock keeper's houses. Still there. It's been added to, but it was originally a lock keeper's house. Notice the wide base of a typical canal prism here and the towpath on this side. Now, if we continue a little bit farther, we get canal, we get towpath, we get Route 189, and if you notice back here, we had a bridge. This bridge, as all canal bridges do, crosses a canal as at near a right angle as it can, because it has to be kept as short as it can, because you can't obstruct the boats on one hand, but you don't have strong bridging materials on the other hand. It's got to be 40 feet or less, and so it has to be high enough to pass animals and wagons across, but high enough for boats to go under, but low enough for animals and wagons to go across without supreme effort. And so it's always tricky. So where the bridge went across is across the canal below Lock 4. Subsequently, when they got to straightening roads and things like that in modern times, there goes the modern road right through Lock 4. That's too bad in a way, but in a way it's not that bad. So here we are, Route 180.
Each lock have a lock keeper in the house?
Yep, they had 2 lock keepers here because there were 6 locks, and 2 brothers, the Holcomb brothers, tended these locks. One stayed at the top house, one stayed at the bottom house. And otherwise, they didn't have to run the whole length up and down every time they wanted to get boats go through.
For the 6 locks?
Yep. So what I want to show you here are these 2 lumps, because those are the foundations, or the abutments of the bridge that originally crossed the canal at a right angle at this point just below Lock 4. And the canal is down there in there beside Route 189. We go a little bit farther and turn around, and now we've got Route 189 cutting right through Lock 4. We know it's a lock because it's in the right place, but we also know it's a lock because it has a V-shaped prism. It's not that wide, broad prism I just showed you across the street, which was canal. This is an old lock, and it's been cut in half for road construction, but it used to look like that, and it was built, at least originally, as a big pit. This one would have been about 14 feet deep, and lined with stones, which held a timber framework inside, which was then lined with wood like a ship inside out, where the water would go. And above it is the canal prism, and below it is the canal prism. This lock lifted the canal about 6 feet. The lock walls would have been, at least in the original construction, something like this, which is what they looked like in New Haven before they came down. This is a stone retaining wall holding back the earth. These are big stones coming out with holes drilled in them to bolt the vertical timbers that held the framework of the lock in place. So this is a good picture of what an original wood-lined lock looked like before it no longer existed. And that's what would have been here originally. And then the lock plan would have been something like that. That's what would have been built inside with a timber structure, each about 80 feet long. Yeah, how do I get out of here? Come on, guy, where's my arrow? What did I do? Text, image, where am I? Oh, I'm not down far enough. There's my arrow. Okay, so that's Lock 4 cut in half. This is the top of Lock 4, looked at from the side. Out here in this little square is Route 189. That's where we were just looking in from, where it was cut off. But this is the part that wasn't destroyed, and you can see it going along like this. And then falling down to a wide prism again. This is between Lock 4 and Lock 3. You go up, and you're looking again at the canal between the two locks. And now we got a narrow V-shaped prism for Lock 3 from the south going north. And there's the entrance to Lock 3. Again, you can see how narrow and V-shaped it is here. No masonry. All the wood's rotted away and probably the stone's been recycled. But this is inside Lock 3. Out the north end of 3, and now looking between 3 and 2. And here we got a bunch of cows in Lock 2. Cows are sitting in there in 1932. Cows ate everything. The land looked a lot different then than it does now because animals were everywhere keeping things eaten up. Now we got poison ivy and brush everywhere, but there they are. And then between 2 and 1, there's between 2 and 1 no longer exists. We have one funny little picture, a part of Lock 1 here. That's the upper lock keeper's house. Lock 1 is there in half anyway, and it's currently obliterated with grass. Somebody filled it all in, and the lock keeper's house is right beside it, as it should be. Now I've got one more stop, and we'll call it a night. I want to get here at the north end of the Farmington Canal. This is the state line. This is the north end of the Farmington Canal. Forget all of this. This is the Farmington Canal approaching the state line. Now the state line is right up here. And you can see when we get here that the Farmington Canal suddenly gets narrow. You see this line coming in from the side is the width of the normal canal, but it's narrowed to the line that it's meeting up with here and extending up into Massachusetts. And it's doing that for a reason. Over here is a circle, and in the circle is another hole. This is the mouth of the Salmon Brook feeder, feeding into the very north end of the Farmington Canal. And I guess I don't need to be here anymore. When we get here, you'll understand better what's going on. Now, this is the situation in 1828. We've got that stretch of the Farmington Canal at the very northern end, which is where the water for the Farmington River cannot reach because it's at the top of those 6 locks. So we got 5 miles at the north end of the Farmington Canal, which can't have water from the Farmington River. The original plan was to take it from the Hampshire and Hampton Canal Company from South Congamon Pond and float it across these 5 miles and then down the locks to Granby, where it would meet the water from the Farmington River, just around Holcomb's Basin, by Lock 6. Well, they did this for the first season, and they found out that the Congamon ponds, although spring-fed, did not have enough water to supply the water for the flight of locks down into the Westfield River Valley and down this flight of locks into Farmington, or into Granby. So the Hampshire and Hampton Company, which was a different company, said, "Nix, no more water from us. We got to have it to go to Westfield with." So the Farmington Canal Company had no way to put water in this northern 5 miles of their canal unless they dug a new feeder. And they had to dig a feeder all the way over to Salmon Brook in North Granby to supply the water. So this is the original situation where you have water coming in from South Pond into the canal, and this is a big swamp right around the state line. Here's the state line here. By 1830, we got the Salmon Brook feeder coming in and a guard lock here. And oh, I forgot, I got this right here. Want to see? Here's the problem. I should think about what I got. Here is the level of the Congamon ponds. Here is the level at the end of the long level. Farmington River water, Congamon pond level. But this won't go uphill. You got to get it from up here to go down. So for this 5 miles, we need another source of water, which Massachusetts on this side of the line won't let us have. So we got to make ourselves another feeder. That sort of explains now. So again, here's the feeder that they built, tucking into there. And there's a guard lock that Massachusetts has built to keep the water from flowing south into Connecticut. Now, after a few years, the water's been flowing through here long enough. This is a tremendous reservoir, 10 feet deep, which is there to supply the northern end of the Farmington Canal. And it all comes from running Salmon Brook into this reservoir. Now, it sounds like a bunch of hooey, but here we are more or less where we were before, with the northern end of the Farmington Canal is just about here. This is the southern end of the Hampshire and Hampton Canal. And look, we're narrow. And we're narrow for about 100 feet like this, which is where the long, narrow wooden box was with gates at each end to keep the water from flowing from Connecticut to Massachusetts. So if you entered here, you'd open one end, put the boat in, close it, and then open the other end and go out, and therefore no water would pass through downhill into Connecticut. And at the north end, looking south, we got the same thing, narrow to wide, wide to narrow. This is where the whole thing was built, and the gates would have been right in here someplace or other. Let's see if that's as far as we need to go there. So that's what that is all about. And the last thing I wanted to show you was where this water came from. I could go along the feeder, but I fear I've probably talked enough and bored everybody enough, but I wanted to show you this neat little find over here, which is the site of the dam which dammed Salmon Brook to send the water over the feeder. And this is Salmon Brook coming south across East Street. The dam site is right about there. And the filled feeder is about here, and it runs down like this and across like this and like this. It's about a third of the way where it's going on this picture. But the dam site is in there. And it's actually in that little red circle right there. I don't know what it looked like, but it is very likely that the dam looked something like this, because this is a crib dam, which is especially suitable for narrow, steep-sided streams. And basically what you do, and it's cheap to build, you build cribs on either side to serve as foundations when they are filled with stones. And wonder of wonders, all that stone is right on the bottom of the stream. All you have to do is pick it up and throw it in the box. And then you build the timber dam in between. And this is almost exactly what I think was where this dam site was. And you get the feeder coming off almost in the right place here too. It's a perfect picture. So when we come here, this is Salmon Brook flowing south towards the dam. And this is the dam site. There's this lump on the other side with a big tree and a bunch of bushes and so on. Get a little bit closer to that, and we see a lot of stones and a great huge tree growing in it. And there's some more stone. And here, I think, is what's left of the stone that was in that crib on that side of the stream. What we're looking at here is, I meant to show back here, but It's about where the red is of what's left of the dam. But to me, it's in the right place. It's doing the right thing. It's the right sort of material. And it measures out 20 feet, which it ought to be just about what it is. If you measure this way and that way, it's 20 feet. And it's all packed over this way. So the box probably went out over this way. But as the timber rotted away and 55 flood and everything came down, probably took a lot of the stone that wasn't anchored by that tree. But I'm pretty sure that's the dam site. So, enough of me. You got any questions? Sorry about the late start, but thank God we got saved.
I would just like to say thank you to Carl for
You have a picture of the model with you?
Oh, I got a couple.
I just want to say thanks to Carl, not only for staying and doing it, but for sticking with it. And I think I would have been exhausted just from the technical difficulties. So we appreciate it.
We got the right wire. That's all it takes is the right wire, but you got to have it.
Yeah, and we have still some dessert if anyone wants some.
If
So
anybody, I got a few pictures here of where I am so far, kind of. If I can get them to open. Those are the cores of the piers, which will be covered with stones. Some idea of scale. These are big things.
Is that you on there?
This is what the outside is going to look like, more or less, when it's covered with that population of stones, which I have to build. There's what the towpath is going to look like, kind of going over the top on one horn. These are the towpath sections ready for installation, almost.
just a little attention to detail. Very neat.
That's how the towpath works. There is sort of a model of the trunk. I've got that pretty much together now. It's just sort of test fitted in there in this picture. But that's one of the spans for the trunk. And there's the towpath across the trunk.
Was the trunk lined with clay, or was it just left with?
No, I just left with wood.
So it leaked unbelievably.
Oh, yeah, they all did. I mean, there are 4 or 5 aqueducts in Massachusetts, and they all leak like crazy. Not just this canal, all canals. I've got actually pictures of wooden aqueducts leaking water, not from here, but from other parts of the country.
How did they form the basin on top, that went across the aqueduct? It was just a box?
Yeah, a box. That's what this guy is here.
Previously, you had documentation as to when, after a number of years, it had rotted. And they needed
Oh, yes. These things are good because they're exposed timber structures outside. They last 10 years and have to be replaced, which is one reason that influences the way it was built, because it all has to be built in a hurry. If this had been a barn, it would have been joined in a completely different and much more laborious manner. The tenons on the ends of these uprights, especially on the trunk, well, actually all of them, but on the trunk, where are you? These are only 1.5 inches long. This is 4 feet high here. It's only 1.5 inches on either end to stick into the main stringers on the top and the bottom. And those are, I imagine, that way because they were easy to make 1.5 inches long and used for locating where they should actually put the thing, but they weren't located together with wooden dowels or tree nails or wherever, as you would with a barn. And with a barn, you'd have tenons, great big things, but these were built very carefully to last forever. This, they know, is going to last 10 years and rot out and have to be replaced. So it's done as quickly as possible. It's held together with these iron rods with nuts and bolts on the ends, like these. And again, there's no provision. I don't know, but it seems to me the simplest, easiest thing to do is just to notch it out and let it go through the floor that way. So that's what I've done. And ease of construction for economy and for knowing that it's not going to last very long. And the reason we have the bill of timbers, which allows us to build a model like this, is that when it rotted, it was built in 26 and had to be replaced in 37 because it was in bad condition. And they left a list of all the wood that they used. So I got it. I wish I had a bill of iron, but I don't. But I do have those pictures of it falling down, which I showed you when I was at the Aqueduct, and those show a lot about the girders and the numbers of studs and where they were placed and stuff like that. And I have a very nice, etching here. Unfortunately, it's behind all this garbage. But this is, oh, maybe I can put it up here, though. Where are you? Someplace here. Where to put it? Yeah, it's all lost in all this stuff. Aqueduct plants. I don't see it. At any rate, this is a woodcut of or an etching of the remains of the aqueduct, which was done about 1879 when it's in decay and falling down. But it's substantially the same as those photographs. And interestingly enough, it's got this iron rod up here with something like a nut on the top of it, which is a big clue to have for how this whole thing was held together.
We just had that conserved in the original and reframed and matted, and it's on permanent display now at the Stanley Whitman House in Farmington.
It's a very important picture.
It's beautiful.
This is in negative form, and it's in black and white. It's
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.